Welcome, everyone. Lovely to see many of you again. Thank you for joining us for our distinguished keynote speakers. We are continuing our day of inspiring speakers with two distinguished AFSers who are going to share their AFS journey and the journey of their careers and insights since, and their insights on the importance to U.S. foreign policy and global relations of the programs we're all engaged in together. I'll just give you a little introduction, which will just skim the surface of both Patrick Mendis and Dominique Reichenbach and their background, but they're going to expound and give us a rich understanding of their journeys, and I think we're all going to enjoy it. And then they're going to give us a little bit of a taste of, and some thoughts around, their article, which many of you may have seen or and read in preparation for this evening, which is called Students Can Save America's Foreign Policy Agenda, which appeared in the Harvard International Review on February 8th of this year. My name is Carrie Dooley. I am part of our leadership team at AFS USA. I am privileged to have been an AFS student with a Congress Bundestag scholarship in 1985, which happened to be the second year of that program, which is still going strong. I am so pleased to have my fellow returnees, Patrick Mendis and Dominique Reichenbach, here tonight. Patrick Mendis is a recipient of the Benjamin Franklin Award and Meritorious Honor Award of the U.S. Department of State. He has recently served as a distinguished visiting professor of Sino-American relations at the Yenching Academy of Peking University in Beijing, and a Taiwan Fellow of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as a distinguished visiting professor of global affairs at the National Chengchi University in Taipei, and currently is a distinguished visiting professor of culture and diplomacy at the Chinese Culture University in Taiwan, and joins us from Taipei very early in his mornings. Thank you for making the time so early to join us, Dr. Mendis. And Dominique Reichenbach is a recipient of the National Security Language Initiative for Youth scholarship, and she went to Dayang, China, implemented by AFS. She later received the Benjamin Gilman and David Boren scholarship and served as a research intern and teaching assistant at National Chengchi University in Taipei. She currently serves as a China news analyst. Both began their distinguished careers in international affairs after participating in their programs, and they are ready to share with us tonight that journey. And at the end, we'll have some time for questions. If we don't get to all the questions that you may have, we'll circle back with both Patrick and Dominique and try to send a follow-up after this. So Patrick, may I turn the floor over to you and ask you to get us started.
Thank you very much, Carrie, and thank you, AFS, for inviting both Dominic and I for this event. We are very honored, and what I would like to do is talk about my story and how I started my journey from Sri Lanka to Minnesota in the United States, and then from Minnesota to how I end up in Washington, D.C. So this all started with AFS. So that is the story. And then I will end up with saying that how I met my good friend and Dominic while we were working in National Chengchi University. So I'm very honored to have her call a friend and also extraordinarily gifted person who also helped me on my writing and editing and advising me certain things. So I'm very honored to be part of this wonderful community of AFS. So let me begin to talk about how I end up in Minnesota. You probably notice my Scandinavian accent and a little bit you betcha, you darn right, and that kind of language that I learned from being in Minnesota in the United States. And matter of fact, I learned to speak English in Minnesota. So I don't have a Sri Lankan British English or the Queen English. I have a Minnesotan English with the Scandinavian accent. So there, I came to America to AFS in 1978. I have my orientation program in Stanford University in California. That's where I learned how to use the fork and spoon. And if somebody said, say hello or hi, just say hi back to them. So this is the first time I learned to say hi. Don't ask any question. I said, what is hi? That means hello. So I learned my 1 week orientation, then I flew to Chicago. And from then Chicago, I had a bus trip to Fargo, North Dakota or Minnesota, Moorhead, Fargo area. So then I met my AFS family. So that's how I end up in Minnesota. So I grew up in second capital of Sri Lanka. It goes back to the 11th century. It is called the medieval capital of Polonnaruwa. It is a UNESCO triangle and recognized as one of the first UNESCO sites in the world. And this capital still known for its Buddhist heritage. And I was born into a Catholic father who grew up in the West Coast near Colombo. And my mother was a descendant of the last king of Sri Vikrama Rajasinghe. And they met as a pen pal. And they had, she converted into Catholicism and they married in a Catholic church and then later became a Buddhist because of the environmental reason in the historic city of Polonnaruwa, which was the Buddhist capital. So I was born there in Polonnaruwa. And as a child, I was very sick. And after 7 months later, and one of the Buddhist monk predicted that I either be a scholarly Buddhist monk or leave my home family or leave the country. So because of that reason, my paternal grandparents raised me because they are who are Catholic. They didn't want me to be a Buddhist monk. But I grew up in a Buddhist environment, Buddhist and Catholic environment. So I grew up in this historic city, both 5 days going to Buddhist school and 2 days I spend my time with the Catholic priest who are living with my grandparents' place. So from there, I went to this village school, which is still is a village. And then I was also known as a kind of king, one of the king in Sri Lanka at that time, King Parakkambahu, because I tend to stay straight. And merely because I grew up in an academic environment and also being in the police cadet and army cadet corps, where I was in the high school. It's similar to ROTC in the United States. So there, because of my prediction or the horoscope by my Buddhist mother came up with, and I was raised by my paternal grandparents, and I called them my mother and father until I became an AFS scholar at the late teenagers, and my parents, whom I call uncle and aunt, tried to sign the papers, and then they found out my real parents are somewhere else. So my grandparents actually were my grandparents, even though I call them mother and father. So from there, I came to Minnesota. As you can see the picture, it is in the local newspaper. And on the right side is when I was a police cadet corps, I became a base commander, and that actually led me to selected as one of the AFSs out of 100,000 applicants. After 100,000, they selected 25, only 9 of them came to America. So it was a very competitive process in Sri Lanka in that time. And when I came to Minnesota, I stayed with my second AFS family is my father was Bill Johnson, and mother was Dorothy Johnson. She is still living, and I actually talked to her yesterday with my American sister. You can see my American sister, Kristen, on the right side, and it is about a few years ago that we found this article in my bedroom downstairs. So this, I became a part of them, and I pretty much a winterized Minnesotan. You can imagine I came from Sri Lanka, very, very, very hot climate. And now I am learning to see snow and part of this family. And I call them mom and dad and my big sister. And in fact, I was the best man in my sister's wedding in Williston, North Dakota. So pretty much I have two sisters and I'm the only son they have. They pretty much adopted me as their own son. At my prom in the high school, I met one of the high school friend and Shaylee Adams. I'm still in touch with her. She's in Florida. And also I still stay in touch with my other high school friends in Perm community. Matter of fact, I talk to them pretty much every week. And on the left side, you can see my best friends I went to their weddings. I was the best man in my Jeff Haviland's wedding, and he was in my wedding, and so forth. And the middle picture is the one of the American diplomat who was stationed in the Sri Lanka and came to help me to come into the Minnesota for the second time when the war started in Sri Lanka. And then the community got together and raised money, the Rotary Club and the Lion Club and all the churches, including the Lutheran Church and the Catholic Church. And they sold the pancakes and raised money and asked me to come back. So I came on the second time in 1983 after my graduation from the Sri Lankan University. So then where I went to work in the Minnesota legislature, then I pretty much met my American father, whom I called, he was father to my family, and my children call him Uncle Ed, and he was the legendary Minnesotan in the Minnesota legislature. So he passed away about 10 years ago this last month. And then there I also met with Vice President Walter Mondale. In fact, I met Vice President Walter Mondale when I was returning from AFS experience in Perm, Minnesota, back in Washington, D.C. Then later on, I met him several occasions, and we exchanged gifts, books, and we often talked to each other. So there I met my former mentor, Ambassador Harlan Cleveland, who is the Dean of the Humphrey School on the left. And I graduated from the Humphrey School 1986, and then went into the PhD at the University of Minnesota, specialized on public policy, geography, economics, and international relations. So there, my American father on the right side was at the legislature. They had the birthday graduation party for me. So then from there, I get involved in political process because I was told if our democracy to work, you must be participant in a democratic process. I think you can see that my fellow AFS Dominic also engaged in similar activities in Arizona as well. So here, then I met with Tip O'Neill, who came to Washington, Minnesota, and also I was in the presidential campaign for Mondale Pereiro presidential campaign 1984. I met with Geraldine Ferraro, and then also with Vice President Walter Mondale. So then while I was in Minnesota, and Sri Lankan president appointed me as the youth ambassador to the United Nations. And he also came from very poor rural area, very underprivileged family, and he considered himself a self-made man, and he learned about me, and then he appointed me to represent Sri Lanka at the United Nations as the Sri Lanka's youth ambassador. So then I had the privilege to meet with another exchange student who happened to be the Zimbabwe president, Paul Lusaka. And then I also received a UN Medal for International Year of Youth. This was the first International Year, 1986. So then afterward, I returned to work for Senator Rudy Bosworth, whom I met on my way back to Washington after my AFS experience. And then later on, I served in his staff in 1980s during the Ronald Reagan time. So it was a kind of unbelievable experience. Previously I was an AFS exchange student meeting him in my other fellow AFS, Yadira Marte from Dominican Republic. And now I'm back in the US and working for the senator I met many years prior to that. So then when from Minnesota, I went to work in Washington. There I met Senator Richard Lugar. I understand that you have a Lugar program at the Humphrey program, Humphrey program, and the Muskie program and the Fulbright program. All are named after the former senators. And then I met with Senator Tim Kaine, former vice presidential candidate from Hillary Clinton, and also my dear friend Senator Chris Van Hollen from Minnesota, from Maryland. He actually grew up in Sri Lanka because his father was the US ambassador there. So Chris and I has a kindred spirit in his study program, internationalization and international education as well. And on the bottom, on the left side, you can see the Brian Atwood, who wrote the foreword to my book. He was the former chairman of the AFS International, and he was the former dean of the Humphrey School. He wrote the foreword to that book. And then another distinguished former exchange student is on the right side, the dean of the Harvard Kennedy School. And he also been one of my professors when I was at the Kennedy School. And then during these years, while I was in the US, working at the University of Minnesota or teaching at Maryland or Yale or Columbia or being at the Kennedy School, I stay in touch with my fellow AFSs back in Sri Lanka. One time, my friend Nimal and rest of the AFS colleague organized the event, asked me to give a talk about US foreign policy and the founding fathers. So at that point, I was in Sri Lanka and met with all the AFSs, and this is the one of the group that I'm still in touch with. I'm pretty sure they are listening somewhere in Sri Lanka, and some are in Australia, and others are in New Zealand, and a few of them are in Europe as well. So I'm staying in touch with them as well. This bottom line is everything is started with the AFS that opened up where I work as a water buffaloes and went to work with the milking cows in Minnesota, and then end up in Washington, DC, and working with different kind of behaviors that we find it with other kind of people around the world. So because Washington is pretty much the international city, you will see many international people. Even my neighbors are coming from, my neighbor is actually French and British, and the other neighbor is Lebanese, and other neighbors are from different countries. So you can see I end up in an international community, and I feel like a home, because all these things happen because AFS. And then from there, I also ventured into China. I taught in 27 Chinese universities and academies, and traveled all the 34 provinces of China, and all the all the 50 states in the US. So this exposure all came from the AFS, because AFS open your mind. You are just not just a citizen of one country, you are belong to the world belong to you. That kind of spirit that I think I shared with my friend Dominic, and that's how that kindred spirit when we first met, and we kind of directly connect. There is some kind of amazing chemistry there with the AFSs, because they have a world view of we are one, we can come from anywhere, and they can be one. That is the American notion of the founding fathers, which I think is very important to know. This is the only country in the world that people can come from anywhere. You can become an American. So if you go to Japan or China, you never become a Japanese or Chinese. But America is unique in the sense, And I think AFS is following that American founding fathers vision of out of many, we are one, e pluribus unum. And that one, I say thank you to AFS, which they also following the American tradition of e pluribus unum, out of many, we are one. Thank you very much. I give yield to the floor to my dear friend, Dominic.
Thank you, Patrick.